Before we continue, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because tomorrow at the same time, we're bringing you another incredible Royal Guard story, one that you absolutely won't want to miss. Don't just watch, be part of the conversation. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And we'll see you again tomorrow. A judge wanted to teach him a lesson, but learned one instead. The summer sun hung high over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The air was thick with heat, the kind that made the very stones beneath one's feet feel like they were radiating fire. Yet, through it all, Lieutenant Edward Eddie Blackwood stood at rigid attention, his scarlet tunic crisp, his bearskin cap unmoved by the faint breeze. He had served in the Royal Guard for years, enduring both the blistering summers and the unforgiving winters, never once wavering from his duty. Today was supposed to be no different. Tourists gathered in front of the palace, snapping photos, murmuring in excitement as they watched the silent sentinels of Buckingham Palace. Among them, families with children marveled at the discipline of the guards, couples posed for selfies, and visitors from around the world whispered in hushed voices about the unwavering presence of these soldiers. But Blackwood had seen it all before. The cameras, the curious onlookers, even those who tried to provoke a reaction, none of it fazed him. Then, a shift in the atmosphere. A murmur spread through the crowd, a ripple of concern that did not belong in the usual hum of tourists. From the corner of his eye, Blackwood noticed movement where there shouldn't have been any. An elderly woman, perhaps in her 70s, clutched her chest, her face pale as she staggered forward. Her fingers trembled as they reached for something, perhaps someone, before her legs gave out beneath her. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. The unspoken rule was clear: never move, never react, no matter what happens. But as the woman collapsed, her frail body crumpling toward the hard stone, something deep inside Blackwood took over. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, breaking the rigid stillness that had defined his service for years. His arms reached out with military precision, catching her before she hit the ground. The weight of her small frame pressed against his steady hands as he eased her down gently. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice calm yet firm, his heart pounding beneath his ceremonial uniform. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A royal guard had moved. And with that single act, Blackwood had set into motion a chain of events that would change everything. The moment Lieutenant Edward Eddie Blackwood caught the elderly woman, the world around him seemed to pause. The weight of his decision settled heavily on his shoulders. He had broken protocol, something the Royal Guard simply did not do. But in that moment, as he held the fragile woman steady, ensuring she was breathing, there was no doubt in his mind that he had done the right thing. Then, a sharp voice cut through the hushed murmurs of the crowd. "You there! Guard! What do you think you're doing?" The words carried an authority that could not be ignored. The crowd parted instinctively, revealing a tall, imposing man striding toward them. His navy blue suit was perfectly pressed, his Italian leather shoes clicking sharply against the stone pavement with each step. He was a man who commanded attention. Sir Charles Montgomery, a senior Crown Court judge known for his unyielding stance on law and order. His piercing blue eyes swept over the scene, his expression one of cold disapproval. He stopped just a few feet from Blackwood, staring him down with the kind of condescension reserved for those he deemed beneath him. "You have abandoned your post," Montgomery stated, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you have any idea what that means?" Blackwood remained calm, his years of military discipline keeping his face unreadable. He carefully laid the woman down as paramedics arrived, his movements precise, controlled. "Medical emergency, sir," he replied evenly, his voice steady despite the storm he could feel brewing. Montgomery scoffed. "And since when are you a doctor, Sergeant? The Royal Guard does not move. Not for rain, not for crowds, and certainly not for a collapsed tourist." The words sent a chill through the gathered onlookers. A few whispered in disbelief. Others exchanged nervous glances. Even the paramedics hesitated, sensing the tension in the air. Blackwood didn't flinch. He had faced far worse than a courtroom judge. Montgomery took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Blackwood could hear. You've just committed a serious offense. I could have you suspended, fined, even removed from service. You may have just ended your career." The threat hung between them like a loaded weapon. And yet, Blackwood said nothing. He simply stared straight ahead, as if the man before him were nothing more than air. The silence only fueled Montgomery's rage, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. The air between them was thick with tension. Lieutenant Edward Eddie Blackwood stood motionless, his face unreadable, his posture unshaken. The weight of Montgomery's threats pressed against him like a vice, but he refused to react. He had been trained to endure worse, to stand unwavering through storms, noise, and even direct confrontation. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was something different. This was a game of power. Montgomery, sensing what he thought was weakness, stepped closer, his expensive cologne thick in the air. His voice dropped, just enough so only Blackwood could hear. "Perhaps you don't fully understand the severity of your mistake, soldier. I could have you docked a month's pay, on the spot. Or, if I decide to make an example of you, we could be talking about something much worse. A dishonorable discharge, a public trial, maybe even prison time." Blackwood remained silent, still, unmoved. But inside, his mind was already working. Every word Montgomery had just said was a lie. Montgomery smirked, mistaking Blackwood's silence for intimidation. He turned slightly, playing to the crowd, making sure they were watching as he put the so-called disobedient guard in his place. "Your silence only confirms your guilt," Montgomery declared loudly, now addressing the growing group of tourists. "Do you have any idea how many foreign visitors just witnessed you breaking Royal Guard protocol? Do you realize the embarrassment you've caused the crown?" A woman in the crowd, middle-aged, with kind eyes, tried to interject. He was helping someone. That woman could have died. Montgomery didn't even glance at her. "Madam, I am a Crown Court judge. I believe I understand the law better than you." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some had already pulled out their phones, quietly recording. A few exchanged whispers, questioning Montgomery's behavior. Still, Blackwood said nothing. That's when Montgomery made his final mistake. With an air of triumph, he reached out and jabbed a finger into Blackwood's chest, right over his polished regimental insignia. That was it. The moment everything changed. Blackwood's jaw tensed. His eyes, for the first time since the confrontation began, locked onto Montgomery's with chilling precision. And then, in a voice calm, measured, and far too controlled, he spoke. "Sir, I must respectfully ask you to remove your hand from my uniform." Montgomery blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Then Blackwood took a step forward. And for the first time, Montgomery stepped back. Montgomery's smirk flickered for just a moment, his brain working to process what had just happened. He had been in countless courtrooms, had made powerful men cower with nothing but his words. Yet, standing here in front of Buckingham Palace, facing a royal guard who had just broken protocol and refused to bow to him, he felt something foreign creeping in. Uncertainty. Blackwood's voice had been calm, almost too calm, carrying the weight of something Montgomery hadn't expected. The judge straightened his tie, his instinct to reassert control kicking in. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, lowering his voice so only Blackwood could hear. "You may have gotten away with this in the past, but today, you're done." Blackwood didn't move, didn't blink. Instead, he spoke again, his voice just as even. "Sir, the statutes you just cited, they don't exist." Montgomery's expression froze. The crowd, already watching closely, shifted uneasily. A few exchanged glances. The two Royal Marines veterans, standing just within earshot, took a quiet step closer. Blackwood continued, his tone measured, controlled, and devastatingly precise. "The Royal Guard Code does not contain sections 12, 23, or 47. There is no official Royal Protection Act that forbids a guard from intervening in a medical emergency. You fabricated every single one of your claims." Montgomery's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Blackwood, finally breaking his forward stare, turned his gaze directly onto the judge, and Montgomery felt it, a shift in power. The silence stretched. Then, Blackwood delivered the final blow. "Before I joined the Royal Guard, I graduated from Oxford Law, first in my class, specializing in constitutional and military law." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The veterans tensed, exchanging looks of quiet satisfaction. Montgomery staggered back a step, his entire posture shifting from dominance to something dangerously close to panic. You, he started, but the words faltered. Blackwood's expression never changed. You just attempted to enforce fictitious laws upon a serving member of the British Armed Forces while falsely claiming judicial authority. That, sir, is called misconduct in public office. The judge's face drained of color. The veterans stepped forward, and Montgomery knew he had lost. Montgomery stood frozen, his face pale, his once commanding presence now reduced to a man desperately searching for an escape. The power he had wielded so effortlessly over courtrooms and subordinates was slipping through his fingers, crumbling under the sheer force of cold, undeniable truth. The crowd, once unsure, had now fully turned against him. Whispers spread like wildfire. Tourists muttered among themselves, eyes darting between Blackwood and the judge. Several had been quietly recording the entire exchange, their phones held just low enough to avoid drawing attention, until now. And then, the final nail in the coffin. A voice from behind Montgomery. Lieutenant Colonel James Whitmore, retired. 30 years of service. Montgomery's head snapped around. The taller of the two veterans stepped forward, his posture rigid and commanding, the tone of a man who had spent his life leading soldiers into battle. The second veteran followed. Major Richard Harland, 25 years, served as a military judge in the Royal Marines. He held up his phone, the screen still recording. Montgomery's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Is there? He tried to recover, forcing authority back into his voice. Is there a reason you're involving yourselves in this matter? Whitmore's steel-gray eyes narrowed. Yes, because we just witnessed a Crown Court judge fabricating laws and attempting to intimidate a serving royal guard. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. The weight of public scrutiny was now bearing down on Montgomery like an avalanche. Blackwood remained still, his stance unchanged, his face unreadable. But when he finally spoke again, it was a quiet, lethal strike. Sir, you physically touched a member of Her Majesty's Royal Guard in uniform. That constitutes battery under British military law. Montgomery staggered back, bumping into a tourist who quickly stepped away, shaking their head in disapproval. This is outrageous, he sputtered. He reached for his phone as if searching for some lifeline, some way to call in a favor that would never come. No one came to his defense. No one backed him up. Blackwood's voice remained steady. I strongly suggest you consult legal counsel, sir. You'll need it. Montgomery knew it. This was over. With one final humiliated glance at the crowd, now watching his every move like a jury waiting for a verdict, he turned and walked away. And just like that, the judge who once held absolute power was reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Blackwood, unfazed, returned to his post, his expression unreadable. His stance, once again, perfect. But everyone watching knew the truth. The Royal Guard wasn't just for show, and underestimating them had cost Montgomery everything. What would you have done in Blackwood's position? Should he have ignored the woman's medical emergency to uphold protocol? Or did he do the right thing, even at the risk of his career? And what about Judge Montgomery? Have you ever seen someone abuse their authority like this? How would you have reacted if you witnessed this firsthand? We want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to intimidate you with false authority? How did you handle it? And if this story made you think twice about the power of standing your ground, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible Royal Guard stories. We bring you real stories of courage, discipline, and unexpected justice, ones you won't find anywhere else. Join the conversation. Tell us where you're watching from and whether you think Blackwood was justified in his actions. And don't forget, tomorrow at the same time, we'll be dropping another powerful story that you won't want to miss. See you in the comments.